Welcome everyone to another session on Current Affairs by Civils 360 IAS Academy. In this session, we will be discussing about the base year revision of the GDP data which has just been completed by the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. So, the concept of base year revision is that for the GDP data, the earlier base year was 2011-12, okay, or financial year 12. Financial year 2012. This was the earlier base year for publishing GDP data by the National Statistical Office under the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. Now this is being changed. It has been revised to 2022-23, okay, or financial year 2023. Okay, this is the new base year for the data. Okay. The second, so this is the first important point. This is the important revision. The second important point is this was recommended under an advisory committee on national account statistics that was chaired by Professor Bishwanath Goldar. Okay, Goldar. Okay, so that is the second important point you have to remember. The Goldar committee is related to the revision of GDP. We have revised our base year. Okay. Okay, that is the second important point. Now, another important point is regarding this base year revision is accompanied with what is known as supply use table framework. Okay, supply use table framework. Now I will explain this idea. So basically when you calculate GDP, there are various methods of calculating GDP. You have the production method where you actually sum the total value of everything that is being produced in your economy. Okay, then you subtract the value of intermediate consumption, that will list the total value of output, total value of the goods and services that is being produced. Okay, that method is what we call as production method. Okay, then you have, when you calculate the total income of all the households, of all the firms, of all the government, you will have another, that is another method. So this is the production method, then you have the income method. Okay, income method. And then you have the expenditure method. Okay, expenditure method. So this expenditure method is usually used by the government to publish, GDP data. Also, the production method is also used. So in the expenditure method, you are actually adding up the total expenditure by the households, what we call as the private final consumption expenditure, which is the largest component of GDP at 60%. And then you have the gross fixed capital formation, which refers to the expenditure by various, firms, private entities to create fixed capital. Then you have the government final consumption expenditure and the net imports, right? Export minus imports. So that will come in expenditure. So there are three methods to calculate GDP, these methods. So theoretically, when you calculate, whatever be the method you choose, it have to be same. Because in an economy, theoretically speaking, whatever you will produce will be bought by someone else. Okay, will be bought by someone else. So if you produce something, it will be marked, it will be bought by someone else. So it will be included in the expenditure. Okay, in one way or the other, in one year or the other, as a whole, if you look at it, it will be there. Right. So this expenditure actually came from the income. Right. So this three methods should ideally give the same value. Okay, but the problem is that the production method, you will use different set of data. The source of the data that you actually use may be different. Like for the production method, you may actually use the data given by the various quarterly reports or annual reports of various companies. Okay, so you have a lot of economy, it happens in the informal sector. For that, you may not have data. Okay, so for the expenditure, you will use household consumption expenditure surveys, right? So you use different data, you will get different values. But theoretically speaking, they have to be same, they have to be equal. Okay, so to overcome this discrepancy, this is what we call as the statistical discrepancy. Okay, this is very important. This is what we call as the statistical discrepancy. And to overcome this statistical discrepancy, this is the solution: supply use table framework. Okay, so what actually happens is that in the supply use table, in the supply use table, what they do is they take a particular product, say cement, cement, then they will calculate its supply side, that is the value of the product that actually enters into the market. So they will calculate, say rupees 100 worth of cement has been produced in the economy, and say rupees 20 worth of cement was imported. So that makes up the supply of cement in the economy, right? And then they will calculate use. Then they will calculate use. Say 80 rupees have been used up by corporates. They have been bought by corporates. Say 20 has been brought by households. Say then you have 10 worth of, this is a worth, worth of goods being bought, and say 10 rupees worth of cement is staying as inventory. They have been unsold. They remain unsold. So basically what we are doing is, this is the production side. This is the what you get whenever you calculate something. I told you that GDP can calculate the same thing for a particular product also. It can be calculated for the production as a production method as well as the expenditure method. So this is the production method. When you use production method, you will get 120. 120. But when you use expenditure, you will get 110. 110. So this accounting framework is what we call as the supply use table framework. So this base year revision, this data additional framework will also be provided by the NSO. So that data can be used to reconcile the two GDP calculations. So from this table, so the policy makers and those who are analyzing this information, they will think there will be some issue, right? A rupees 10 worth of cement is missing. So you will look at your source data. So you may understand that the production was 110. Or the production was not 110. Say the production was only 90. So the production was only 90. Then it will get tallied. So you can see that that is the correct value. Or sometimes the inventories may be more. So this table is used to solve the discrepancies between the production and expenditure method. That is the idea that you should have. So this is one change, one additional information that will be provided from now onwards by NSO when it publishes the GDP estimates. So another important change that is being brought out is actually regarding the deflation. So what happens now is, like before the revision, whenever you calculate GDP, you will have nominal and real, right? Nominal and real. So real GDP factors into price changes, from the base year. So what happens now is, when this deflation actually happens over a particular year, said now we use wholesale price index as the deflator. So when you use wholesale price index as the deflator, you are actually using, this is the index, this is the inflation rate. So you use this value to deflate you take away the impact of inflation and to get the real GDP value. But this is applied, the same index, the same inflation is applied to both inputs and outputs. Okay, so whenever you are actually calculating our GDP, you are assuming that the cost of inputs and the cost of outputs are actually increasing at the same rate. Okay, but the same wholesale price index, that value is being applied to inputs and outputs. But the reality is that inputs may, their inflation may be higher. Okay, or if it may be lower. Say inputs inflation is lower and output goods, okay, goods and services, their inflation is higher. Okay, so the net there is a, what you can say, this single deflation. So you use a single deflator to both inputs and outputs. Okay, so for inputs and outputs when you calculate GDP. But this base year revision, what happens is that they are going to use different inflation. That is, they are going to deflate inputs according to their own index, their own inflation value, and outputs also will be deflated. You will take away the effect of inflation according to their own inflation value. Okay, so different index, different values will be used for inputs and outputs. Okay, so we are actually using a double deflator. Okay, double deflator. Okay, so that is another important change that you can actually see in this revision. Okay, I hope this idea is also clear. Okay. Okay, the next important idea is regarding a MGT7 form. Okay. That is a annual, annual report being filed by various companies with the Ministry of Corporate Affairs. So this is an annual form. It will contain all the detailed information regarding the operational side of the company. Right. So that is now being integrated into the GDP calculation. Okay, GDP calculation. Another important, to improve the data quality, what they are doing is, so we need data from the households, from the informal sector and all, right? So in the earlier, I told you that the base year was actually 2011-2012. So they used an earlier set of data and they used to extrapolate the data to a particular year to get the values of household expenditure or household production, what is being produced by households, okay, for the informal sector, okay, what is being produced, okay, what is being sold, okay, how much is the informal sector spending. All those actually was based on surveys that happened in 2011-2012 or surveys near to this period. Okay, now what they do is, this new base year is now going to use annual survey on unincorporated enterprises. Annual survey on unincorporated sector enterprises. Okay, as well as the PLFS data, or periodic labor force survey data. These are annual surveys conducted by National Statistical Office. This data will give you a lot of information regarding the productivity of a labor. This is regarding the productivity of a labor. This gives you the labor force. Okay, so this data is then, it also gives data on household expenditure. It also gives data on the informal sector. So all this is actually being integrated into GDP. That is the idea you should have. Okay, so remember the surveys that are now going to be integrated into the GDP data. It improves the quality of data. Okay. Okay, so this is actually built upon the System of National Accounting of 2008, okay, which was published by the United Nations Statistical Divisions. Now I have revised that to a 2025 also. A new edition of the System of National Accounting has been released. So the next base year revision will reflect that change. Okay, this is based upon the 2008 System of National Accounting. Okay. So that is the another idea that you have to keep in mind. So once again, just to recap, we are actually revising the base year. So the base year revision of the GDP from financial year 2012 to 2023. So this year, this prelims, you can expect a question on the base year revisions, the ideas underlying it, right? CPI revision we saw in another video, the ideas of linking factor and all those things. Please watch those videos. This session we actually discussed on GDP. We looked at who was actually chairing the committee whose recommendations were actually being followed. Then we saw the double deflator. We also saw about the MGT7. Right. Then we saw about the two surveys now going to be integrated. Okay. So all these are actually aiming to improve the quality of data. Okay. So the first publication will be after this February. Okay, after February 2026, all the base year estimates will be given as per the new base year of 2023. Okay, that's all in this session. Thank you.